Let's start shallow and then get deep. For me, this is a reasonably profound issue. Back when I lived in Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand, what I discovered to my horror, and it really was a long-term, enduring horror, was that underage prostitution, child sex trafficking, was the easiest thing in the world for the police to discover. The reason why the laws were not being enforced was simply that people didn't want to know about it. And the authorities, to a very large extent, in all three of those countries, were involved in aiding and abetting it. I was eventually employed in research directly linked to this field. So not just the law enforcement, but AIDS prevention and like the charities that try to provide education and a new chance at life for people who became prostitutes as children or very young teenagers, and then they move on to other jobs later. Sooner or later, they emerge from their captivity or whatever you want to call it. I did formal research on that at one stage of my career in Cambodia, and then informally when I was actually a nonfiction editor. We had books and we had PhD level research coming in that I was editing to be published in books related to all that kind of stuff. And one of the simplest methods of finding the brothels where they have underage prostitutes, simply to show up in any one of these cities at the airport, bus station, train station, whatever they had, flag a taxi, and ask a taxi driver. And what these researchers found, this was dead serious social science research. Basically everywhere you went in the region, all the taxi drivers knew. And they'd know offhand. Like if you asked, oh, well, at this brothel, what type of women do they have at this brothel? They would know what the ages were, what was on offer and what wasn't. Because for the taxi drivers, that was a huge part of their business. And if by chance one of the taxi drivers didn't know for some reason, which there was not even a single example of that in these studies, then of course they could tell you, oh, ask this other taxi driver who's older and who knows about that kind of stuff. I don't remember a single anecdote in there of a taxi driver saying, no, I'm a pious Buddhist. I don't do that kind of thing. So there are a lot of advantages to living in a society built on a very permissive religion, very permissive cultural foundation like Theravada Buddhism. There are disadvantages also. I would rather live in Thailand than live in Saudi Arabia. I assume the amount of prostitution in Saudi Arabia is a lot lower than Thailand, but whatever prostitution is there is obviously very secret, very tightly controlled. It's out of sight. But for sure, I'm not claiming different modes of authority. All right. So that's the shallow end of the pool. What R. Kelly's case illustrates is that this stuff goes on. It's created and sustained through the willing ignorance and even active participation of a relatively large number of people. And a lot of the public outrage in recent weeks leading up to the announcement that he'd actually faced charges, that he's gone into custody, $1 million bail. Leading up to that, a lot of the outrage was actually directed towards the smaller figures, people who were in an assistance role, so to speak, around the edges of this. Now, for me, the deeper point I wanted to reflect on, which is more broadly applicable to a lot of questions in life, is actually about the utility of short-term prison sentences for the earlier and less serious charges in a person's life. If we're really asking what kind of a positive lesson can we draw from R. Kelly's life and trajectory, the terrible truth is the fact that he got away with these crimes earlier on in life is exactly what emboldened him to do it again and again and again as his life went on. Now, let's say hypothetically, the first time he committed this crime was with the singer Alia. I have no reason to think that. Perhaps he had other targets before, certainly had others after, but let's say hypothetically that was his first experience. So we know that there's paperwork where he tried to legally marry Alia and where he apparently lied on the paperwork about her age. Allegedly. What if he had just done 6 months in prison for that? What if he'd done 6 months in prison for submitting false paperwork on the application? Okay? What if he'd faced a relatively mild statutory rape charge at that phase? A lot of the anger and anguish is focused at the end of the process, where you're talking about a man who's 50 years old and has like an unquantifiable number of victims. And people are saying, put him in jail, for the rest of his life, execute him, calling for really extreme punishments. I think the question we all really need to reflect on is, couldn't all of this harm have been reduced? The tragedy for some of his victims, the tragedy for him as a person, if the Department of Corrections actually had a corrective effect on him earlier on through relatively small sentences for relatively minor infractions at an earlier phase. Cambodia and South Africa are both examples of societies where tremendous atrocities were just swept under the rug in the name of peace, order, good governance, and keeping business rolling. And you can see footage, I've seen this, you can see footage of the so-called Truth and Reconciliation hearings in South Africa, where you have a black woman sitting down with a black man who tortured and executed her own son. And today, that black man is still employed as a police officer or maybe even a post office worker. So he's in some kind of government employ. And the point is, before, in the bad old days, he was one of the people who worked for the white establishment in apartheid South Africa. Like all those regimes, a large part of the dirty work was not done by white people. It was done by local black people employed by and following orders from the white establishment. And that mother is just supposed to sit there and take it. And they're supposed to have some kind of pious Christian moment of acceptance and forgiveness that this guy is not even going to spend one day in jail, that he has impunity. And then the flip side, you scale that up. Okay, maybe this particular guy, maybe he does go on to be a law-abiding citizen. I doubt it. What's the educational effect or process of getting away with the crime? Because again, it's not just that R. Kelly became a worse person because he didn't go to prison. He became a worse and worse person because, he kept being confronted with the possibility of getting to prison and then feeling that he was better than the system, the feeling that he was better than his accusers, being emboldened and hardened in those actions. Ultimately, I think you can say he developed a sense of entitlement. He felt entitled to break the law. That's something, I see even in people I know directly in my own personal life. You let them get away with this little crime and they go on to commit other crimes. You create a little culture of impunity, even if it's a culture on the smallest scale, culture of just a few people, like a culture of R. Kelly and the 30 people around him who are his enablers, his helpers, his handlers, his assistants, so on and so forth. In Cambodia, on a massive scale, the fact that there was no justice for anyone. And, again, words like truth and reconciliation, all these really phony, insincere, all this humanitarian jargon from the United Nations was used to glorify the fact that people who had committed atrocities, torture and murder, beating people to death, confining people, starving to death, but, literally the employees of the main torture chamber, S21, right in the middle of the capital city, that those people all just had impunity. Now, I think there were a lot of crimes where we really have to look at the corrective power of the state and say, you know what, maybe this person shouldn't be locked up forever. Maybe they shouldn't be locked up and throw away the key. Maybe there really should be the possibility of correction. With the exception of people who are so poor that they find prison conditions an improvement over their quality of life. That exists still today. There's a big issue during the Great Depression. There were a lot of people who were sent to prison and said, well, the quality of food and shelter I have is better in prison than it was when I was outside of prison. That's not such ancient history, and obviously in a third world country like Cambodia, I've seen some Cambodian prisons that were really terrible. But anyway, it's possible. It's possible the prison conditions are better, so you can get some inverse incentives that way. Any middle-class person in the United States of America, any person who knows what it's like to be able to do your own laundry, you know what I mean? To own a washing machine or this kind of thing. You don't think 6 months in prison feels like a long time? I'm not saying today R. Kelly should have 6 months. At this point, sure, death penalty. whatever, 100 years, whatever. The question I'm asking is, would it have been possible for R. Kelly to get on a much better trajectory in life by getting some kind of short corrective sentence earlier in life? So guys, in terms of my own politics, I'm certainly left of center. If I were an American, I'd be voting for Bernie Sanders, not Donald Trump. However, I'm not left-wing. I'm not far left. And to me, I think one of the sickest things that left-wing academia, one of the sickest influences on mainstream culture coming out of left-wing academia is this idea that the controlling and coercive nature of the state, of government, is always a bad thing. And just those words, control and coercion. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. I don't want to guess what percentage of men, like R. Kelly, really feel attracted to sort of 14, 15, 16-year-olds, right? And that's a different category of pedophile from the guys who are chasing after 8-year-olds. It is. They're chasing after girls who are right around the age of puberty. It's a different market. Again, I've seen the statistics, in countries like Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia, where people have the freedom to do that and get away with it, where there isn't the coercive power of the state preventing that behavior. Would you like to venture an estimate as to how many men would live like R. Kelly if they could get away with it? It's a shame that we can't more effectively educate people on how to cope with their own sexuality, whether that's straight or gay, whatever feelings you've got, where it's like, yeah, this may be innate in you, this preference. I have no doubt. R. Kelly is born different. There's a lot of things different about this guy. He remained illiterate quite late into his adult life. He may have really serious learning disabilities. He may, in some sense, be mentally retarded. Wouldn't surprise me at all. I don't think we're going to get a diagnosis coming out of court. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. There's a lot wrong with R. Kelly. And he's in a minority. It's not the majority of men that are after what he's after. Not by any stretch of the imagination. But recognizing human nature for what it is, in all its diversity, in all its contradictions, in all its darkness, and really providing people with an education that says loud and clear, there are some things you want that you can never have. There are some things you want, you desire, where it is your absolute moral obligation to deny yourself. That's very alien to American culture, right? And ironically, that's a big part of what Buddhism as a religion is about, living in that kind of self-denial and self-discipline. And why is that? Ultimately, it's for the greater good. Ultimately, it's so that we can have a society where 15-year-old girls are safe going to McDonald's unattended by a father or an uncle. It's so that those little girls can grow up and become full-grown women without carrying with them this bizarre memory. We've just heard testimony, of losing their virginity with R. Kelly and so on. It's, there are a lot of real knock-on consequences for how society as a whole operates. It's not for any one simple reason that this is ultimately stigmatized, shamed, and punished with the long arm of the law. But the alternative is, it's the same with drug policy. If you want to reduce the number of people that are encountering government persuasion at the punitive end of things, corrections, prison, then you've got to increase the number of people who are getting the message early on through education. And that is something in the United States of America, in the 21st century so far, nobody is really comfortable with doing.